It's just transitory, we were told. Prices won't go up more than normal, we were told. We can handle much more debt. We can keep printing money and it will be fine. And of course, we all believed it. Politicians and economists call it an inflationary surge. But to you and I, and hundreds of millions of people across the world, we call it the cost of living crisis. The latest figures emerging from the US, UK and Europe show our major economies reporting spiraling levels of inflation not seen for an entire generation. And I'm sorry to give you the bad news, but things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. Our governments are simply unwilling to raise the interest rates enough to cool down this inflation, protect their citizens' life savings, and of course their ability to afford everyday essential items. As it stands, the United States has just recorded a 7.5% year-on-year increase in the cost of living based on the Consumer Price Index, also known as the CPI. This is the highest year-on-year increase since February 1982, when a 7.6% increase was recorded. But of course, this is the statistic for the general public. For those of us in the know, we know the true figure is closer to 15% when calculated using the old CPI metrics of the 1980s. Right now, we need a 10% interest rate rise just to slow down the current inflation spiral. The UK has just recorded its highest annual inflation rise in 30 years, with a 5.5% year-on-year increase in January, the highest increase since 1992. Stick around until the end and I'll tell you why these small increases to interest rates will actually make inflation worse. And I believe the UK could hit 8 to 10% in the coming months as the country braces itself for a 54% increase in energy costs alone. That's not even counting any of the other inflationary inputs. That's just energy. So here's my question to you. Are you still glad that we blew up our power plants to stop CO2 emissions?
2, 1.
Given that inflation is now at its highest point in a generation, how far does the currency in your pocket go compared to the past? $1 in your pocket today gives you the same purchasing power in 2012 of just 82 cents. That's an 18% loss in just 10 years. 2002, 64 cents. That's a 36% loss. 1992, 50 cents. So that's already a 50% loss just in the last 30 years. But it gets even worse. 1982, just 34 cents. That's a 66% loss in purchasing power. 1972, 15 cents, an 85% loss. 1962, 11 cents, an 89% loss. And 1952, just 9 cents purchasing power today. That's a 91% loss. Let's look now then at the three main metrics that are adding to the inflationary spiral. Let's begin with housing. As I've mentioned in previous videos, housing is one of the big ticket areas where the financial impact is greatest on families. The average monthly rent in the US in 1982 was $292. Now that's the equivalent of $850 in today's money. But renters are currently paying on average $1,104 per month. So that's 30% higher. For homeowners, the average US home in 1982 cost $69,000. That's $201,000 in today's money. But you may ask, isn't the average house price today more than $408,000? Yes, it is. Well, that's a 103% rise. In the UK, a home in 1992 cost £55,000 or £122,000 in today's money. But in reality, an average home today will set you back £274,000. So again, the numbers don't add up. That's a 125% increase. What about rent in the UK? Well, in 1992, the average monthly rent was just £150. In today's money, that's £332. But the real average monthly rental cost in the UK today is a whopping £1,064. So again, the numbers don't add up because that is a 220% increase just on the CPI figures and data there. Today's cost of living crisis is not about the disparities between today's prices and those experienced during the last inflationary surge. It's about how much less disposable income we have now compared to just last year. It's about our affordability for the basic essential items that we need to survive. And it's about the real threat of pushing millions more into abject poverty. And the government and the central banks know this. They realize what's going on, and they are making the crisis worse. Why is it that they have now a separate CPI with housing and food omitted from it? And why do so many media companies always reference this new CPI? It's pretty obvious what they're trying to do. The next point I want to come on to is probably the most severe of all the inflationary crises right now, and this is the energy crisis. Remember, everything begins and ends with energy. US home energy costs remain the top driver of inflation last year in 2021, rising 30% from 2020. And with increased demand over the winter months, I'm expecting at least 50% higher bills for consumers this year, if not more. In the UK, the new price cap on energy will rise 54% in just a couple of months' time this April. Those on default tariffs will see an increase of almost £700 per year, while those on prepayment meters will see a typical increase of around £2,000 per year. Of course, I've talked about this a lot, but it's not the middle class and the wealthy who are most affected by these rises. It is the poorer people in society who will be on the prepaid meters. The price cap increase was something the government could have stepped in and done something about. But guess what? They chose not to. Let's move on to food costs now then. According to the US official figures, which I personally don't agree with, but US food prices are estimated to rise an overall 5% again in 2022. However, I really do believe the public's trust in the politicians and bankers is wearing thin. How many more months are they going to tell us that price rises will start to go down soon? I personally believe that prices will continue to go up throughout 2022. I believe we could see price increases on some food products by as much as 50%. US shoppers expect to spend an average of $611 per month on groceries this year, which is an increase of about $79 or nearly 15% over their projected food budgets for 2021. Again, these were already elevated food budgets. The average annual UK grocery bill could rise by around £180 per person in 2022 this year, with grocery prices rising 3.8% just in those 4 weeks leading up to January 23rd, with already price rises which we saw in January of 3.8%. As an example, the cost of the cheapest rice in the supermarket has increased from 45 pence per kilogram to an unbelievable £2 per kilogram. That works out to be over a 400% increase. So how worse off are we expected to be then this year in 2022 compared to 2021? Well, it's very difficult, very complicated to try and estimate all these things, especially with the manipulation in the CPI and the numbers we're being told being completely different to what we're seeing in the supermarkets, what we're seeing on our energy bills, what we're seeing on rental prices. So I expect anywhere from $2,100 up to $4,500 is what you will be worse off by this year in 2022 as a result of the inflationary rises from 2021. And I should be more specific, this is for an average US family. And again, we're talking just 2022 here. This doesn't even include what I believe is going to happen in 2023. For the United Kingdom then, I'm expecting the average family to be worse off by £2,500, anywhere up to £4,000. Of course, all of these things we've talked about here with the rising inflation and the lower cost of living is going to have knock-on effects throughout society. We will see an increase in societal issues. We could see an increase in crime rates. We'll definitely see an increase in homelessness on top of the already surge in homelessness, especially throughout the United States, where 1 in 500 people now is officially homeless by government statistics. Another disturbing statistic is that 7.6 million households out of the total 120 million households in the United States are struggling to find affordable housing. The survey is even more disturbing, with the number of families saying what they will have to do in the coming year if they cannot find affordable housing. And again, this doesn't include all the statistics of people who are not considered homeless, the 500,000 people now living in motels, and I mean full-time living in motels, because they simply cannot afford to build up the money required for a tenant deposit or a bond. What about the hundreds of thousands, according to the government statistics, of people living in their car? None of this should come as a surprise to any of you. When I started talking about these things 2 years ago, I said exactly what would occur, and these things are now coming to pass. In the United Kingdom, the homelessness problem is not quite as bad, but there are some, again, disturbing statistics. More than 1 million UK adults reportedly went an entire day, so 24 hours, without having a meal last month. Some 4.7 million adults, or 8.8% of household, experienced food insecurity in the last month. This is according to the Food Foundation, which was an increase from 7.3% in July of last year. Of those, 1 million reported that they or someone in their household had to go a whole day without eating because they simply could not afford food. Another survey recently conducted showed that 4 million UK adults said that they now have to make a decision with these new rates as of April of 2022 as to whether they heat the home or eat. Again, I covered this last week in a video. This is going to lead to a huge excess number of deaths in the next year because of this crisis, and the governments should act. They have the power to do something about it, but they are simply not taking the action. So what are governments doing to resolve all of this? Well, you won't be surprised to hear, not a lot. And I actually believe and have the data to show that they are currently making the crisis worse through their actions. Whether this is intentional to pay off their government debt, or whether this is just simply incompetent, or whether it's even more nefarious than this and they are doing it to help their buddies out at the highest levels, of the wealthiest of the elite. Because the rich own lots of assets, the poor don't tend to own any assets. And the more assets you own, with prices rising via inflation, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. That's what's meant by the expression when you hear that. There is really only one option left to solve this crisis now, and it's not a good option. There are no good options left. The only best case, worst option really is to raise interest rates to something like 10%. Of course, this would cause a huge recession, if not depression, very, very quickly. But what it would do is it would wipe out all of the bad debt from the economy, all of the bad companies, everyone that's just leverage, and what you would end up with is some very strong companies. The problem is if they just do small incremental interest rate rises, the companies are going to continue on with their bad debt, and they're going to pass these small rises on to the consumers via the products, not as much the services, mainly the products, and inflation is going to get even worse. And yes, I do read the comments on here. People say, well, what about Biden's 3-point plan, to turn this around and stop inflation, or Boris Johnson's? Guys, let me tell you, I've got the plan here. So it's a 3-point plan. Number 1 is to fix the supply chains. This is impossible. We now have globalization. There's no way that any country can fix the supply chains in China and Vietnam and wherever. They simply don't have the power to control those governments to do that. Number 2 is, of course, build back better. I've covered this and very controversial videos on this on the channel. Build back better. Every politician was saying it. They're not anymore. They were all going on with this plan to build back better until people like me and other people out there actually exposed what Build Back Better really was. As a result, Build Back Better failed miserably in pretty much every country. It simply did not pass. And number 3 is, of course, the carbon net zero. I'll be talking about that very shortly. Very disturbing things behind that. Creating all of this new currency and new bonds and everything else and new treasuries in order to actually pay for this carbon net zero will only add more currency into the markets yet again, into the economy. It will make inflation worse. So to summarize then, we have compromised leaders, failing economic policies, central bankers who are not willing to do the right thing, and more than 20 different major crises sweeping the world right now. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but this is going to get a lot worse for all of us before it gets better again. If you'd like to know how you can better position yourself, there are a lot of videos on my YouTube channel that will help you with that. You can also join my private community. The link is below in the description. That will also show you with a monthly video every month how I'm investing. You can actually look at all of my investments. I talk about the macroeconomic landscape and how you can actually overcome some of these inflationary forces. Thank you so much for watching today. Please click the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Other than that, take care, God bless, and I'll see you next time.